Warning, the following video contains really bad French pronunciation. If you don't like it, complain to Hannah's French teachers for not doing a better job. Hortense de Beauharnais, the first Queen of Holland. Daughter of an empress and deeply entangled with the Bonapartes. She was a queen that went on the run, was blacklisted for being extremely dangerous and seen as a terrorist threat. Mother of the future Emperor of the French, Napoleon III, and his illegitimate brother, the Duke of Morny, which also means, as you might have guessed, that she was an adulteress. It's fair to say that the life of Hortense de Beauharnais was far from boring. Hi, I'm Hannah and welcome to my channel where I talk about royal history with a few opinions and hopefully a bit of humour thrown in.
I want to believe you.
Don't take it too seriously, you know. If you're new here, I would appreciate it if you would subscribe and let's explore the life of Hortense de Beauharnais, Queen of Holland. Hortense Bonaparte, or Hortense de Beauharnais, whatever you prefer, was born Hortense Eugénie Cécile de Beauharnais on the 10th of April 1783. Her birth was a premature one, and her mother Rose de Beauharnais gave birth to little Hortense on her own in Paris. This was not because she was early. Her father, Alexander de Beauharnais, was abroad in the French colonies, and he is convinced, or he convinces himself, that Hortense is not his biological child. Hortense was Rose and Alexander's second child, and she had an older brother, Eugene, with whom she would share a close bond with. Hortense was an independent little girl and loved to please her mother, a trait that she would keep as an adult. At the age of 2, on the 5th of March 1785, Hortense's parents separated. The custody of their children was split. Rose had Hortense and Alexander had Eugene. Her parents' separation would go on to impact her view on marriage quite negatively, and she came to recognise separation as a normal state for a relationship. Her parents had never had the best relationship, and therefore Hortense had never been given an example of a loving relationship, until her mother married Napoleon, and even that is problematic. In 1788, when Hortense was 5 years old, her mother Rose took Hortense to visit her grandmother in Martinique. Hortense would reflect fondly on her memories in Martinique. She enjoyed running around in bare feet, dancing and singing. Hortense would refer back to her life in Martinique frequently in her memoirs. By 1790, the effects of the French Revolution were being felt in Martinique. What with that and the slaves' revolt, Rose felt that it was necessary for her and Hortense to return to Paris. Unfortunately for Hortense, her father Alexander was a victim of the French Revolution. He was imprisoned and eventually guillotined on the 23rd of July, 1794. Her mother Rose was also arrested. However, she was released from prison on the 28th of July, 1794. During this time, Hortense and her brother Eugene would wander around Paris. Upon her release, Josephine's new goal was to rebuild her life and social status. As a result, Josephine deemed herself to be too busy to bring up children, so she sent Hortense to a boarding school in the summer of 1795. Hortense was sent to the Institution Nationale de Saint-Germain, a girls' school founded by Marie Antoinette's former lady-in-waiting, Madame Campan. Hortense would flourish here. She learnt all the skills a young aristocratic lady would need, including music, dance, drama, and painting, and she earned awards such as the cleverest child and the bravest child at school. Madame Campan would remark, "She is the most delightful girl of 12 years old that I have ever had to teach." Hortense also made a close network of friends, including Madame Campan, but also Adèle Auguy, a close confidant, and the future Madame de Broc, Eliza Monroe, daughter of the future US President James Monroe, and apparently Caroline Bonaparte, her future sister-in-law. However, I'm not too sure how true that last one is. Also a student there was Hortense's cousin, Émilie de Beauharnais. Hortense's mother Rose, or Josephine, wed Napoleon Bonaparte on the 9th of March 1796. Rose and Napoleon had only known each other for 5 months prior to the wedding, and Hortense had first met her stepfather at a family dinner. Despite the fact that there was no chance of her parents getting back together, on account that Alexander was dead and headless, Hortense was not happy with her mother. She was actually quite angry with Josephine marrying Napoleon. I have two theories about this. Either because she felt that she was trying to replace her father with Napoleon, or she wasn't happy with how quickly that they were getting married, considering they hardly knew each other. At first, both siblings, Hortense and Eugene, were distrustful and reserved about their new stepfather. But that soon changed to admiration, and as we will see, Hortense will become one of Napoleon's biggest supporters. In her memoirs, Hortense wrote that Napoleon was very affectionate towards her and Eugene, and that he received with all the affection of a father. In 1800, 17-year-old Hortense was expressing her flirtations for Charles de Gaunt, and especially General Gerard Christophe Michel Duroc, a soldier and friend of her stepfather Napoleon. Hortense may have even loved Duroc. The pair spent the whole of the winter of 1800 to 1801 together. But, like many women, she would have to give up her true love for a political match. The frustrating thing is, if Hortense and Duroc's relationship had occurred a year earlier, or even a few months, Napoleon probably would have allowed the match and a potential marriage. Remember, at this point, she wasn't the daughter of an empress. But, as her mother had failed to provide Napoleon an heir, her position was vulnerable. And, in order to save her own relationship from sinking, Rose, or Josephine, proposed a marriage between Hortense and Napoleon's younger brother, Louis, to provide the Bonaparte Beauharnais heir that Josephine could not provide. Hortense was shocked. She didn't want to get married to Louis. She was in love with Duroc. And she didn't particularly like Louis. He was gloomy and a bit of a hypochondriac. Josephine put pressure on her daughter to marry Louis, and as we know, even as a little girl, Hortense only wanted to please her mother. So, reluctantly, she agreed. Louis also didn't want to marry Hortense, but after pressure from his brother, he too agreed. Hortense and Louis Bonaparte were wed on the 4th of January 1802. The wedding was miserable, as neither party really wanted to be there. Reflecting on the wedding during his exile on St. Helena, Napoleon said, "There were faults on both sides. On the one hand, Louis was too teasing in his temper, and on the other, Hortense was too volatile. Hortense, the virtuous, the generous, the devoted Hortense, was not entirely faultless in her conduct towards her husband. This I must acknowledge, in spite of all the affection I bore her, and the sincere attachment which I am sure she entertained for me. Though Louis's whimsical humours were in all probability sufficiently teasing, yet he loved Hortense, and in such a case a woman should learn to subdue her own temper and endeavour to return to her husband's attachment. Had she acted in the way most conducive to her interest, she might have avoided her late lawsuit, secured happiness to herself, and followed her husband to Holland. Louis would not then have fled from Amsterdam, and I should not have compelled to unite his kingdom to mine, a measure which contributed to ruin my credit in Europe. Many other events might also have taken a different turn. Is Napoleon slightly blaming his downfall on his stepdaughter? Hortense may have been reluctant in marrying Louis, but that didn't stop her from performing her duty, as 9 months later, on the 10th of October 1802, the couple welcomed their first child, Napoleon Louis Charles Bonaparte. They welcomed their second child, Napoleon Louis Bonaparte, in 1804. Hortense and her husband Louis were also present at the coronation of Napoleon and Josephine on the 2nd of December 1804, which was held at Notre Dame Cathedral. Hortense wore a dress that was studded with diamonds and watched the grand ceremony with her eldest child, Louis Charles, who held her hand throughout. Napoleon was not shy at handing out titles to his family, and his brother and stepdaughter were no exception. On the 5th of June 1806, Emperor Napoleon made Louis and Hortense the King and Queen of Holland. Hortense was not happy about this, as she didn't want to leave France. She wrote her brother Eugene, bewildered by the fact that she might actually have to go to Holland, the country she's been given the title of queen for. I mean, how ungrateful. If somebody offered me a queenship, I'll take it. I mean, they don't exactly advertise those jobs on LinkedIn. Hortense wrote to Eugene, "Do you really think they're going to send us to Holland? I cannot think of it without bringing tears to my eyes. My God, I will die of grief of it."
This is awkward.
Despite her complaining, Hortense and Louis arrived in The Hague in Holland on the 18th of June with their 2 sons in the carriage. The newspapers in the Netherlands reported that the beautiful queen was wearing a silk robe highly decorated with pearls and diamonds. The people of Holland loved their new monarchs. I can imagine they had a similar impact of Will and Kate in the fact that they are a young, stylish family, although this love would not last. Louis, like his brother Napoleon, hated the fact that his wife was as popular, if not more so, than himself. When they moved over to Holland, Hortense started introducing a lot of French culture, presumably because she was a bit homesick and because she liked it. She brought with her French culture such as fashion and decorations. Also, like his brother, Louis had trust issues and had his wife spied on, had her letters opened, and he forbid her to dance. As we saw earlier, music and the arts have always been a keen interest for Hortense, so when Louis banned dancing and then told her that she wasn't allowed to sing or play the piano in public, I can imagine she was heartbroken. And very quickly, life for Hortense became bland. She may be Queen of Holland, but she was a prisoner in her apartments. And just to rub salt in the wound, Louis started to spread rumours about Hortense's love life, which tarnished her reputation. He then demanded that she no longer accompany him in the festivities. For me personally, I think this was all so he could enjoy the spotlight by himself. And I think the lack of respect for Hortense as a wife and stepniece,
Gross,
and a woman, and as a person, just shows. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. The couple lived in different parts of the palace and avoided each other at every opportunity. I don't blame her with a husband like that. And Hortense even described herself as a prisoner in her memoirs, which may explain why in her exile she refused to return to Holland. Further friction was caused when Louis renounced his French citizenship, so he could declare himself Dutch. Hortense refused to give up her French citizenship, feeling that was very much part of her identity. However, despite all of this, Hortense appreciated, but nevertheless surprised, at how warmly the Dutch welcomed her, and quickly became accustomed to life in the Netherlands. She came to love the country. She would visit the marketplaces and, like her mother, spend lots of money. Prior to her husband banning her, she would attend official celebrations and ceremonies, and she would make herself accessible to her subjects, which is probably why she was adored so much. She learned watercolour painting and made trips around the countryside. I don't think it was a secret to anyone that despite having 2 children, the royal marriage was in tatters, to the point that Napoleon intervenes by writing to the pair of them. Now, I'm not making Hortense out to be the victim, because by all accounts, Louis was a difficult person to live with, but she does nothing to help herself. Louis would suffer several seizures a day, so he would frequent spa towns to help his condition, although this isn't a cure by any means. As we alluded to earlier, he does have a jealousy issue, but he was very intelligent and a bit sensitive. Hortense made no effort to comfort or reassure her husband, and in his letter that he wrote on the 2nd of May, 1807, Napoleon told his brother, "You have an excellent wife, and you make her unhappy. Fix it." He equally reminded Hortense that Louis may have some unusual ideas, but Louis is just a man. The couple would briefly reconcile, but not under happy circumstances. Their eldest son, Napoleon Louis Charles Bonaparte, died of croup on the 5th of May 1807. Hortense was at her son's bedside. She was devastated over the loss of her son. Hortense went back to France to be with her mother. Louis, who was still being pressured by Napoleon to try and save his marriage, also went to France. This time in France did their relationship some good, as after this encounter Hortense became pregnant with baby number 3. But Louis became paranoid and convinced himself that his baby was not his. Why do I feel there are just so many similarities between Hortense's life and her mother's life at this point? They almost feel parallel. Rumours were being spread back in Holland that Admiral Charles Joseph Comte de Flor was the baby's father, not Louis. Which I know the two had an affair, and they will go on to have an illegitimate child. But at this particular circumstance, it's just utterly ridiculous because they were nowhere near each other. Hortense was allowed to stay in France as the climate was supposed to be better for raising her son, Louis Napoleon. While in France, Hortense enjoyed her status as a queen at the French court, which lasted until 1810, when her stepfather Napoleon remarried to Marie-Louise of Austria. The baby finally arrived on the 20th of April 1808, and he was named Charles Louis Napoleon Bonaparte. This particular child would go on to be known by another name, Napoleon III. By December 1809, Louis was trying to get a divorce from Hortense, despite the fact that at this very time, Napoleon would be going through a divorce himself. He still refused to grant Louis a divorce. Instead, he allowed the couple to separate. Hortense kept custody of the children and was given a stipend to ensure her independence. As mentioned, Napoleon was divorcing Josephine, but despite this, Napoleon still saw Hortense as his daughter, or a possession, and he demanded that she return to her husband in Holland and reconcile, which she did the next year. Hortense returned to Utrecht in 1810 with much reluctance. She was not happy with the smell and thought that the women of Utrecht were ugly.
Uptight mama's daughters, they were.
That's Hortense's words, not mine. A lot has happened to Hortense at this point. She's grieving for the loss of her eldest. Her mother and stepfather are getting a divorce. She can't get divorced. And she's being accused of being an adulteress, and her youngest son's legitimacy is being called into question by his own father. So when she returned to Holland, her subjects noted how ill and weak she looked. Our poor queen, she's so miserable. It got so bad that a few weeks later, it was thought that she would die from this mystery illness. But she doesn't, spoiler alert. Her appearance was also noted on. She returned to Holland looking very pious. Her image did not match the rumours that were going round. But, as mentioned earlier, she was still deeply mourning the loss of her son, and as many people do, she turned to religion, and it was her faith that kept her going during this dark time. And was Napoleon the supportive stepfather you'd expect him to be? No, absolutely not. He wrote to Hortense on the 20th of May 1810, telling her that she was spending too long grieving. My daughter, everything which reaches me from The Hague informs me that you are unreasonable. However legitimate may be your grief, it should have its bounds. Do not impair your health. Seek consolation. Know that life is strewed with so many dangers and may be the source of so many calamities that death is by no means the greatest of evils. Your affectionate father, Napoleon. He then wrote to Josephine on the 24th of May and added, I see with pain that your grief is still unabated, and that Hortense has not yet arrived. She is unreasonable and does not merit that one should love her, since she loves only her children. It's just worth remembering that obviously Hortense is grieving over the loss of her son, which is also Napoleon and Josephine's grandson, and only the women seem to have the normal reaction. Don't know what that says about psychopath Napoleon. Okay. Then Napoleon has the nerve to send this follow-up letter to Hortense on the 2nd of June. And I gotta say, from a personal standpoint, the more I read about Napoleon, the less I like. My daughter, You have not written me a word in your well-founded and great affliction. You have forgotten everything, as if you had no other loss to endure. I am informed that you no longer love, that you are indifferent to everything. I perceive it by your silence. This is not right, Hortense. It is not what you promised me. Your child was everything to you. Your mother and I, are we nothing then? Had I been at Malmaison, I should have shared your anguish, but I should have also wished that you would restore yourself to your best friends. Adieu, my daughter, be cheerful. We must learn resignation. Cherish your health, that you may be able to fulfill all your duties. My wife is very sad, in view of your condition. Do not add to her anguish.
Nah, yo, hold my poodle. Hold my poodle.
Father of the Year, that is. In the summer of 1810, after battling a potential life-threatening illness, she asked her husband Louis if she could return to France, because as I said earlier, it was thought that the climate was better in France, and she probably just wanted her mummy. Surprisingly, Louis agreed, but their son Napoleon Louis Bonaparte, who was now 5, would have to stay, as he was the heir to the throne. Hortense would never see her adoptive homeland again. Within a month, Louis abdicated, and their son Napoleon Louis succeeded his father for 2 weeks, although some sources say even less than that, after which the entire Dutch Bonaparte family had to flee Holland and return to Paris. On the 20th of March 1811, Empress Marie-Louise gave birth to the heir of the French Empire, Napoleon, the King of Rome. The son of the Emperor was baptized on the 9th of June 1811 at Notre Dame Cathedral. Hortense was in attendance at the baptism and had the honour of godmother, which she shared with Napoleon's mother Laetitia, Madame Mère. Okay, I don't know how true this next bit is, but apparently at around this time there was a bit of a love triangle between Hortense, Caroline Bonaparte and Charles de Fleur, and both women were vying for his attention. Now, I know the two women both had affairs with him, but what I don't know is how competitive they were about it, or even if their affairs overlapped. From what I can gather, Caroline had her affair with Charles quite a bit earlier. But if I'm being completely honest, I wasn't really too fussed about researching the affair. I was actually focusing more on Hortense herself. So the fact that I've just mentioned it, there you go. Apparently, Caroline did try to damage the budding relationship, but to no avail. And Hortense and Charles went from courteous to passionate. Either way, Hortense had been seeing Charles for at least 9 months because in September 1811, she secretly gave birth to an illegitimate child.
You what?
Charles Auguste Louis Joseph in Switzerland. Charles was the father, and only her brother Eugene, de Fleur's mother, who would go on to raise the child, and Hortense's closest companions were aware of the pregnancy. Hortense was forced to keep the birth a secret to avoid scandal. The success of her being able to avoid scandal reveals how much Hortense was able to trust her entourage. Hortense had used the excuse of poor health to explain her prolonged visit to Switzerland, where Charles's mother, Adelaide Filou de Souza, had arranged. On the 29th of March 1814, things were getting a little bit squeaky bum time in Paris, as the collapse of Napoleon's reign seemed to be imminent. Louis Bonaparte demanded that Hortense come to him for safety, but she ignored him and went to her mother Josephine. In hindsight, you could say that actually, she was fleeing her husband, not the situation. Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte was forced to abdicate on the 6th of April 1814 and goes into exile in Elba. King Louis XVIII would be the next ruler of France. However, his reign would not start until the 3rd of May. So, during this time, Tsar Alexander I of Russia, who had invaded France, was in charge until Louis arrived. The Tsar led a prayer ceremony on the spot where fellow monarch King Louis XVI had been executed, and a Te Deum was jointly conducted. While in Paris, Alexander frequently visited Josephine and Hortense. He had taken a liking to both women, and he considered advocating for Hortense and her children in Holland, which greatly confused Hortense. She wrote, "My only support left is an enemy?" During her visits, Alexander would take her young children on his lap. When King Louis XVIII finally arrived in Paris, before handing over the power, Alexander was able to secure Hortense the Duchy of St. Louis, making her the Duchess of St. Louis on the 30th of May 1814, much to the reluctancy of the new king. But this was bittersweet for Hortense, as her mother Josephine had died just the day before, at the age of 51. So maybe this gift from Alexander was to protect Hortense, now that she had no parents left, as both Alexander, her father, and Josephine were dead. And Napoleon, well, he was as useful as a chocolate teapot.
From a certain point of view.
Or it could have been just to cheer her up. Pretty much as soon as the Russians left France, Napoleon seized the opportunity to make a comeback and recapture his imperial throne. Napoleon returned to Paris on the 20th of March 1815 to cheering crowds. King Louis XVIII fled, and Napoleon began what would be known as his 100 days. On his return from Elba, Napoleon initially received Hortense coldly, but he pardoned her. However, Tsar Alexander and many of the other European monarchs would see Hortense's support of her stepfather as a betrayal. Yet when Napoleon came back to France for those 100 days, nothing was the same. Marie-Louise was in Austria with their son, not speaking to him, and Josephine had died. Contrary to the Tsar's advice, it was Hortense who stood by her stepfather/brother-in-law like an empress. Hortense and Eugene both supported Napoleon. Napoleon's return initially started well, but then he suffered defeat at the hands of the British at the Battle of Waterloo. On the 18th of June 1815, he was forced to abdicate again 4 days later on the 22nd of June 1815. Napoleon did try to flee to America, but he was captured by the English and sent to St. Helena. This time it was the British and the Prussians who ruled France until King Louis XVIII returned to France on the 8th of July 1815. Napoleon reminded Hortense, "When you share in the rise of a family, you must also share in its misfortunes." And she did. This time the Russian Tsar kept his distance from Hortense. He wasn't prepared to put his neck on the line after her betrayal, and King Louis XVIII had decided that she's gotta go. Hortense was now seen and treated as a traitor and a danger, as she was a rally point for remaining Bonapartists. On the 17th of July 1815, Hortense was informed that she had to leave the city of Paris within a couple of hours. She was accompanied by Count Edouard de Beauharnais and Carl Philippe, Prince of Schwarzenberg, who were there to mainly keep an eye on her. Hortense was nearly arrested twice. Thankfully, that was avoided with the help of Carl Philippe. And it was only now that Hortense understood the severity of her situation. She wrote, "Enemies taking my part, Frenchmen acting as my foes. For the pleasure of persecuting me, they had placed themselves in a humiliating position and allowed themselves to be reminded that they had to be defeated." And now Hortense was on the run. Hortense was homeless, not in the situation that she had nowhere to live. I mean, she is still a former queen and an imperial princess, but she doesn't belong anywhere. France don't want her, and she didn't want to return to the Netherlands, having remarked, "I ruled there once." Hortense was seen as a danger, and it was thought that she and everyone else would be safe if she was in one of the 4 main ally states, Britain, Austria, Prussia, or Russia, where they can keep an eye on her. But Hortense refused. She would spend the next few years roaming around Europe. Hortense was forced to have a passport so that her movements across Europe could be tracked. She was also placed on the blacklist, which also featured the terrorists that voted for the murder of King Louis XVI and radical revolutionaries, and all of the members of the Bonaparte family, as they had been exiled. So as you can see, this single mother of two is being viewed as a very serious international threat. All of Bonaparte's family were exiled, and like Hortense, they could only live in one of the 4 major Allied countries. The other Bonapartes also had to have a passport, and it stated on their passports that they were on the blacklist. Most of the Bonapartes sought exile in Switzerland or Italy, which they accessed via the Netherlands. Tsar Alexander did offer Russia to the Bonapartes, but no one was keen. Thanks to the Tsar and Clemens von Metternich, an Austrian diplomat, the Allies made a deal with the stubborn Hortense that she could stay in Switzerland, which was more liberal than the other locations she had been offered. But it was to only be temporary, and she would have to accept that she would be spied on. Hortense was allowed to split her time between Augsburg and Switzerland. In January 1817, Hortense bought a small country house at Arenberg, Switzerland, which would become a hotbed for revolution and artistic creation. Hortense also used her jewels and wealth to help fund revolutionaries or Bonapartists who wanted the Bonaparte family back on the throne in France. This small chateau entertained writers, philosophers, and Bonaparte royalists, and it would be at this little chateau that Hortense began to write her memoirs as a way of expressing her life in her own words and being remembered her way, which is quite remarkable for a woman of her time. While here she indulged herself in all the pastimes that she enjoyed, but Louis had banned, such as singing, dancing, and composing music. She even drew and painted here. And she had many famous guests at the chateau, which included the poet Lord Byron. Underneath this innocence, a resistance was growing. She kept the spirit of resistance against the Restoration regime alive. She raised her sons to be staunch Bonapartists. Hortense ended her relationship with Charles. I think he was looking for something more serious, but she refused to give Louis the divorce that he wanted. In 1819, Louis went to the Pope to ask him to annul his marriage, which he didn't. While at Arenberg, Hortense composed several pieces of music, most notably her 12 romances, which she wrote for her brother Eugene. Despite being banished from France, just like her home in Holland, Hortense's home exemplified the spirit of French culture. Hortense's most famous composition was Partons pour la Syrie, which I played as the intro to this video and will again at the outro. It became the national anthem of France during the reign of her son, Emperor Napoleon III. In 1825, Napoleon Louis, Hortense's eldest surviving son, was living in Italy with the rest of the Bonaparte's family. He wed a year later on the 24th of July 1826 in Florence to his first cousin, Charlotte Bonaparte.
Gross.
Napoleon's will said that he wanted his nieces and nephews to marry amongst themselves to conserve the Bonaparte wealth. Charlotte Bonaparte was the daughter of Napoleon's older brother, Joseph. This union did not provide any children, probably for the best, and Napoleon Louis was 2 years younger than his wife, and at first Charlotte found him rather immature and humorless, but they grew to, I don't want to say love each other, they grew to get along. On the 17th of March 1831, Napoleon Louis Bonaparte died while fighting for the rebel group that was trying to drive the Austrians out of Italy. His official cause of death was measles, but he potentially might have taken a bullet. Napoleon Louis died at the age of 26 in his brother Charles Louis's arms. Hortense must have been devastated at losing another son, but she held strong and met with her son Charles, and together they travelled incognito to Paris. They arrived in Paris in the April. Hortense, keeping a low profile, contacted the new king of the French, Louis Philippe, asking for passports so that she could go to England with her son. Remember, Hortense had a passport, but hers said that she was on the blacklist, so she needed another one if she wanted to travel safely. Mother and son were warmly welcomed at Tuileries Palace, and he agreed to getting her the new passports. King Louis Philippe was more liberal than the old Bourbons. Rumour of Hortense's presence in Paris began to spread, and on the 5th of May, a large crowd gathered, shouting, "Vive l'Empereur! Live the Emperor!" The next day, Hortense and Charles were ordered to leave, so they took their passports and went to England. Napoleon had set his line of succession as his son Napoleon II, then his brother Joseph, then Louis Bonaparte, but neither Joseph or Louis had any interest in re-entering public life. So, when Napoleon II died in 1832, Charles Louis Napoleon became the de facto heir, after which Charles Louis went off travelling and he went on to live his own life. In 1837, Hortense fell ill while Charles Louis was in the US. He managed to return to Arenberg just in time to be with his mother, who died of uterine cancer on the 5th of August at the age of 54. Hortense would never get to see her son become Emperor Napoleon III, and she was buried at the Saint Pierre et Saint Paul church with her mother Josephine in 1838. Charles Louis did not attend his mother's funeral, and the Dutch newspapers only dedicated 3 lines to the death and funeral of their first queen. Charles Louis became Emperor Napoleon III on the 2nd of December 1852. He chose his favourite song that his mother had composed, Partons pour la Syrie, as the national anthem. Hortense had lost 2 sons. She raised the other one to be an emperor. A portrait of Hortense hangs at James Monroe's Highland, the Virginia plantation home of James Monroe, the 5th President of the United States. It was one of 3 portraits Hortense gave to Monroe's daughter Eliza, with whom she attended school in France. Eliza named her daughter Hortensia Monroe Hay in honour of Hortense. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give this video a like, make sure to subscribe and share this video with a friend. If you haven't already, make sure to check out my other Napoleon content. I've got Napoleon himself, Hortense's mother Josephine, Empress Marie-Louise, and a video on what the 2 women thought of each other. So if you haven't already, go check it out. But until the next time, have a wonderful day.